course, Lola is going to tell you about what it will take for relationships to be strong. What are some of the components that allow for that to work? And as we discussed, which is really talking about the community, this is where sort of those kinds of relationships start to occur. We start to talk about engagement and trust is purely a relationship concept. Values, purpose, and vision. Now, there may be an organizational vision, but we all have worked, and you all are working in places where you could have hundreds of different vision. Every person has a different vision, and every person might have a different value system. Thus, being able to bring them together is a critical component. And of course, we work in an environment where we have a great deal of diversity of our workforce. We're still wrestling with the concepts of equity. This is 2020, and we still haven't got it, that everyone is the same and everyone is to be valued and for what they bring. It has nothing to do with where they come from, what their gender is, and what their political or other orientations are. It's a concept we continue to wrestle with, and one that we have to be aware that we're continuously wrestling with. So that's another clue that I think we'll throw in here, is that people who are leaders or want to be leaders learn about themselves first. And we're going to come back to this concept. They learn who they are and what they're all about before they can lead anybody else. So we are struggling with these concepts. And even when we have all of the equity and the diversity, we struggle with the inclusion part. And then the aspirational aspect is to unleash innovation and creativity in an organization.
I absolutely agree with you that especially like equity and diversity and inclusion, these are such an important aspect to recognize that underneath our different colors or different backgrounds, we are all human beings. We all have human needs. I'm going to stop sharing this. We all have human needs of being valued, important, matter to each other. And we want to feel that way when we work with people. And sometimes we don't recognize in the moments when we lose that connection. This is where we start to go into the path of losing that value, or maybe losing the sense of sharing the value or recognizing the value of the other person because we feel disconnected. So Ramin, you are right on point that we have to start with ourselves. We have to start with ourselves to recognize what is happening with us. How do we feel? How do we impact each other? And how we need each other in order for us to succeed.
I want to come back to one point just because it was raised. So I think Soha's point about the leadership being at any level needs to be emphasized again, because we have to realize that it does not sit at the top. It sits everywhere. You know, there's that old custodian in NASA story, right, where he was asked why he's working so late, and this is before the first manned flight to moon, and he was working very hard, very late, and they asked him, why are you working so hard and so late? He said, I'm putting a man on the moon. He didn't say, I'm helping put a man on the moon. He didn't say, I'm here because there's other people. He said, I am putting a man on the moon. That ownership, that is a point of leader. Leaders, is really easy to spot them in an organization. A person who acts like an owner is a leader. The person who acts like a person who comes in and punches the ticket and is there to do a job and a task is a different kind. But a leader, as soon as they say, I am putting a man on the moon, that's a great sign. So thank you, Soha, for bringing that up, because we so often look for leadership in the C-suite, where it actually exists throughout the whole organization. And sometimes it's at its lowest levels.
I have goosebumps every time I hear that. So that's a great story, and I love that. It's so inspiring. So thank you for sharing that. All right, let's go to our next call. If you think about past few months as a leader, what have you done with your peers or your direct reports? Go ahead and take a moment to answer this question. All right, we have some excellent responses. I love that the first one is staying accessible, responsive, and engaged. Amazing.
Other than just pointing out the obvious, none of these things have anything to do with whatever the objective of your organization is. Every one of these is about relationships. Every one of these is about building relationships, such as recognizing people's care and value, just simply just saying, I really appreciate what you bring to us, to reaffirming that they have courage and strength to be dealing with the issues that they're dealing with, coming to work, whether you're underneath massive financial challenges or dealing with the pandemic or dealing with both or dealing with a market share problem. These all takes courage, and reaffirming that it's creating a great relationship, creating a safe place for people to share their emotions. How often have we gone to someone whom we saw as a leader and shared our emotion and come back extremely dissatisfied from that experience? And that causes broken relationships. And when the opposite happens, how strong we feel, how great we feel, how much we feel like we're part of the organization. Sharing my fears, and maybe this was one that brought some challenge for you, but to realize that we're all afraid, every one of us, including the people whom you might consider leaders or C-suite people or what have you. Everyone is afraid of some things. And we're not talking about being afraid of bees or snakes or those things. We're talking about fear of disconnection, fear of being misunderstood, fear of not being able to carry their responsibilities out the best they can. So being able to share our fear actually brings people in as opposed to the other direction. So this is something we'll talk a little bit more about.
I love that you're spending some time about sharing fears, because fears, that is true. If we do not know how to share fears, they accumulate, and we have a way of kind of carrying those fears with us. And it's really hard for us because there's also fear of not being seen and not being heard and not being valued. So when we're able to express our fears in a coherent way where people can hear us, it does bring us closer. Ramin is absolutely correct. It pulls us closer and makes the bond stronger and makes the relationship stronger as well.
One last thing is one of our participants asked a question: how do I share this information with someone who either doesn't get it or hasn't been to this thing? I wanted to just put my 2 cents in. Simply doing these actions or some of these actions with that individual. Maybe you're not ready to share your fears with someone whom you feel disconnected with, but recognizing them, reaffirming their courage, being available if they come to you to talk to you about their emotions or their challenges, figuring out how to maintain your own emotional balance by understanding yourself. These are all the ways in which the kind of bond that needs to get eventually strengthened can get some life support into it. But ultimately, the bonds will get created when we share our fears and are able to go through that. So we'll talk more about this, but I wanted to recognize one of the questions that was posed to us
Yeah,
before
Deborah,
the
thank you for the
webinar,
question. That was a
so that we can keep that in our mind, because we all struggle with that. We go to things and we say, well, how can I get this other guy to see this?